What are your 10 favorite movies?
My 10 favorite movies is an impossible question. And I would be like I would probably short circuit. I will tell you what one of my all-time favorite independent films is, which is the original Slacker, directed by Richard Linklater. That movie completely breaks your standard mold of a traditional storytelling, with 3-act structure. It's a day in the life of Austin, Texas, where we meet all types of people in all walks of life, and they kind of have intersecting lives. Each story kind of crosses over into the next, and it's beautiful and absolutely sweet and inspiring. That would be in my top 10 list. Another film would be 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, is probably, for me, a perfect film in the sense that I saw it when I was 5 years old as a kid, and it blew my mind, and I probably watch it every few weeks. And by that I mean I keep it on in the background while I'm working on other things, but 2001: A Space Odyssey is so inspiring, is so beautiful, and then I mean it's a true work of art, and we don't see a lot of films that live up to the words true work of art these days. And I tend to notice something new about it every time I see it. There's something fascinating about that film. And just the artistry, the cinematography, the way that these special effects in that film stand up to today. There was never a special edition of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Although, pro tip, if you get the film on iTunes, they will allow you to watch the film with the original 1968 theatrical sound mix, which I strongly recommend. But that film inspires me. I kind of turn inward whenever I watch that film and think about life and death and the cosmos and the unknown and all the unanswerable questions that that religion attempts to answer for us, that are truly unanswerable only perhaps by faith. And that film asks those questions without providing an answer, which I think is terrifying. So I love that movie. The original Star Wars also has to be on that list, along with The Empire Strikes Back, because at the time that they were made, when you go back to filmmaking in the 1970s, those movies were dark. Another favorite I would add to the list, I'm actually going to get to the list, is Taxi Driver by Martin Scorsese. And when you look at the films that were being made at the time in the 1970s, they were very dark. The themes were, this is a post-Nixon era when, really it was in the shadow of all the, cultural upheaval of the 1960s, and the 70s were the hangover from that. And still, films were very dark, even in the realm of, science fiction. And George Lucas set out to kind of flip that and say, I'm going to make a fairy tale for kids because there are no heroes in movies today. I mean, at least that's what he thought in the early 70s when he first began his journey of writing the original Star Wars film. So that one just stands out. And when I say the original Star Wars, the original cut that was theatrically released on May 25th, 1977, which I saw in a theater just a few days later, that original cut is just remarkable. And famously, George Lucas did continue to cut even after it was only released on about, a dozen screens initially. And The Empire Strikes Back just sort of flipped that. Interestingly, when George Lucas set about working on the story for The Empire Strikes Back and determined that his heavy, which was considered to be, in the initial writing of Star Wars, a small role, Darth Vader, he considered, I'm going to make this the main hero's father and present a dilemma that is, in order to, defeat the evil empire, I have to kill my own father. And he actually consulted a child psychologist to learn how this might affect children, how the idea of this might affect children. We live in a time now where pop culture is consumed so quickly that a new Disney Plus series episode will come out on a Wednesday, and we've dissected every part of it, found every Easter egg, and discussed it to death within 24 hours of its airing. And the same goes with a film. It opens on a Thursday night, Friday, and by Monday, it's all been discussed. At the time that films opened, when I was a kid and seeing movies, it was a discussion that lasted for some of these films years. Logan's Run, I would add to that list, only as I don't really have a guilty pleasure. I'm just going to say Logan's Run. Because I like the ideas espoused in that film. Yes, it's shot in a shopping mall in Dallas with futuristic escalators and cheesy special effects that do not hold up. But the performance by Michael York and Jenny Agutter is just transcends the poor special effects. Also an amazing score. But that film had a profound effect on me as a kid. And I just love the ideas that were, there's a little bit of Brave New World in that, in Logan's Run, kind of borrows from that. And the theatrical version of that movie with Michael York is very different than the novel by William F. Nolan, which I read as a third grader, and it really scarred me because it's such a different, the book and the movie are so vastly different. A top 10 list for me is just like so difficult to put together. I can talk about favorite films, and those kind of change with what my current thinking is about things. So this is an impossible question, which is what I'm happy you're asking. It's really impossible for me to respond to that with a top 10. But these are some of my favorites, and the reasons they resonate for me to today.
Now, if Boyhood had come out when you were a child, do you think that would replace Slacker? Is there something nostalgic about some of the, because, for me, I loved Boyhood. It's not that I didn't like Slacker, but I thought Boyhood was a masterpiece. So do you think that would have been your one of your top 10? Yeah, that's an interesting point. I do think that many of the films from that are in my top list are movies that I saw at a younger age, because they left such a profound impression. Films like Apocalypse Now, I think, and I would also say I would add to that list Pink Flamingos, John Waters. I saw that film when I was 16 years old. I got a car not because I cared about girls. I got a car because I wanted to go to movies. So when I went to this repertory theater, did a John Waters tribute, and I saw Pink Flamingos, and it was shocking to me. I couldn't believe that people that structurally speaking, I guess it follows 3-act structure, but there's so many shocking elements in that film. In addition to Glenn Milstead, the drag queen Divine, who is, probably one of the greatest drag queens in cinematic history, if that could be said. But that movie had a huge effect on me when I was 16, and then I just sort of went down a rabbit hole. I was fortunate enough to work at a video store that had some of his other films. Female Trouble might be a personal favorite because it involves Christmas Day and Cha-Cha Heels, which I thought was so weird. John Waters kind of opened my world up to movies don't have to be this way. They don't have to be Hollywood films. So I would say everything from Slacker being this small indie movie made by this kid, Richard Linklater in Austin, Texas,
just huge effect on me, to like John Waters, who's been a true independent his entire career, to truthfully, George Lucas is an independent filmmaker. You know, I mean, yes, he found funding in Hollywood, but his company, Lucasfilm, was not located in Los Angeles. He relocated to Marin County in Northern California, specifically to get away from Hollywood. I don't blame him. But I would say that if there's a thread that all the films that had an effect on me is they're all by very independent-minded voices. And my fear with modern Hollywood, as it becomes more corporatized, is that those voices will be lost. And the ability to express oneself through cinema, because it's so expensive, those voices will be lost. And that's what I have a real concern with. And I see where the 70s filmmaking in Hollywood was very independently driven, with this young group of filmmakers, everyone from Spielberg to, you know, Lucas and Scorsese and Coppola, among others, young at the time. They were these new mavericks in Hollywood, and truly had independent voices. I don't know if we'll see an era like that again. And it's disheartening to me. And I hope that there is some push to support these independent filmmakers. I do whatever I can with my own outlet, Film Threat. You know, we champion these small filmmakers, but they just don't get the support from the mass media, like whatever the latest Disney, Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars thing is, which tends to consume the conversation of film for that week. And so that's kind of been my life's work through Film Threat, is just to elevate these smaller movies. I just wonder if we'll see that same era again.
Are many of these filmmakers that come to you through Film Threat, their films have been crowdfunded?
I think crowdfunding has changed the game. Certainly, I've used crowdfunding for projects. My track record's about 50-50, you know? I've failed as much as I've succeeded, but crowdfunding has changed the game tremendously, certainly putting more power in the hands of indie filmmakers. I'd like to see that expand into bigger projects. Not just movies made for a couple $100,000, but in the millions. So it's put the power in the hands of indie filmmakers. I mean, money is as much an auteur on a film as the director, you know, itself. That's just the reality, right? It's an influence, money or the pursuit of that. So crowdfunding has helped. I just, the thing I look at is how are independents going to compete with the corporate filmmaking that is kind of taken over?
What if we say they won't, but those who are driven by very special stories know where to find their films? And we just accept that we may never be watching Carrie in a theater again. Unless it's...
Well, I hope that's not the case. I mean, I would look on it as Robert Rodriguez with El Mariachi, you know, which he made famously for, you know, it's like what? He shot it for like 7,000. I was completed for far more than that. But that film is so raw, but filled with so much passion and heart, you know. I just, that is the type of movie I'm talking about, is that really tiny one that kind of breaks through. I do think with the advent of, you know, cameras that are so, you know, affordable, right? Including our phones, right? Which can shoot in raw 4K if you know, with a couple of apps. You know, that combined with a little bit of crowdfunding and some ambitious casting. You know, I really would like to see more film. I'll see a movie and I'll think, this is awesome. I don't know who's in this, you know? And I know that while that's not going to affect someone like myself, it will affect a traditional moviegoer whose first question is who's in it, because that's also what a distributor is going to ask. And indie filmmakers would be surprised to learn that it is possible to get someone to be in your movie that's a known actor. You can pursue that. I think, you know, you would be remiss not to do that. Like if you put together, you've got a solid script and it's attracting talent. I don't just mean in front of the camera, you know, cinematographer, other people that are interested in being involved. You have to think about who's going to be in it. And you have to kind of go down that path of getting know a lot. You'd be surprised, you know, who's accessible via social media or via an IMDb. You know, like it's amazing when I hear the stories of how friends of mine have gotten talent to be in their film. Everything from, well, meeting them at a party at a film festival, to reaching out via social media, to, you know, going through the correct pathway, which I think is generally the least successful, which is going through an agent or a manager, because they're, you know, what they're thinking is an agent or a manager is, am I making money from this? And usually with a first-time filmmaker, something that's a small crowd-funded project, they won't be making money. The manager or agent will not be making money. And so it's not really in their interest to pass it along to the client, because the client can only do a certain amount in a given year. I will say that if you can cast up around unknown leads, I think that that's really important. And if you can, if you can make it possible to make it convenient for the actor. I just saw a film called Too Late, a very small comedy horror film. Fred Armisen has a bit part in it, but he's in the whole movie. He was shot out in one day. So you really have to ask, and you really have to hold out. And if anything, schedule around some of your larger talent, and make sure that you at least take the time to see what's possible. There's a movie called Rent-A-Pal that's a really bizarre horror film that was put out recently by IFC. The director, John Stevenson, used Will Wheaton's in the movie, and he was shot out in just a few days, right? Like, Will Wheaton's in the whole movie, right? But he, you know, for him, it was a couple days work. So you have to be creative about finding those opportunities in your story. Like, is this someone, you know, is this something that is castable for a known person, and who should be on that list, and start going after those people sooner rather than later.
Let's talk about killing iconic characters. When is it okay? When is it a horrible mistake?
I think it's really important, if you want to retain the audience for a franchise, how you kill off an iconic movie character. Absolutely critical. And there are places in movie history where it's been done right, and there are places where it's been done completely wrong and it's been bungled. It's upsetting to me. I mean, first of all, the death of an iconic fictional character is already upsetting just on its face. Let's talk about a case in which it was done incredibly well. In Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, you're taking Leonard Nimoy's character Spock, who he'd played, you know, for decades by then. And you're now killing off this character. You're killing off Spock. It's handled so well. It's not a wasteful death. Spock dies in an act of self-sacrifice, trying to save the crew of the Enterprise, which he'd done many times before, and skirted death. Now he's, you know, dying in the engine room of the Enterprise, facing his best friend, Jim Kirk. Because the important thing to remember and this is something for screenwriters to keep in mind, is that the death of the character is not about the person doing the dying. It's about the reaction of the characters that love the character that's going through and experiencing their death. And so what we got to experience as an audience was two longtime friends, and in an act of self-sacrifice, Spock is dying, and he gets to say his final words to Kirk. And Kirk gets to see his friend. And in addition to that, that scene is followed up with a funeral with some glorious music, and I mean, we didn't know at the time that they were setting up a sequel, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, which kind of gives it away that Spock might be coming back. But be that as it may, no one's ever dead in fiction, but the way that that death was handled with such respect for all the characters involved. It was satisfying in the sense that we experienced the love that James T. Kirk has for his friend Spock. And then the reactions of people who loved Spock and how they were affected by his death. His death had meaning. Conversely, one of the worst deaths ever handled in movie history was the death of Han Solo in The Force Awakens. You know, many people were upset with The Last Jedi and how Luke Skywalker's character was handled, but the thing that lost it for me was Han Solo's death in The Force Awakens. It's not done in any sort of act of self-sacrifice. There isn't a moment where other characters can react to Han Solo's death. He's simply, dispensed with by his own son, Ben Solo, with a lightsaber to the heart, and then falls down an endless chasm. Generally, falling down an endless chasm is the kind of death that usually a villain experiences. Leading cause of death amongst villains. I'm sure there's an infographic somewhere on the internet that will tell you this, because that's how the Emperor died in the original Return of the Jedi, Episode 6. That's how villains go out. Falling into an endless chasm. We don't really see the bloodiness. It's off screen. That's how a villain goes out. And to have Han Solo die in that way and not have a last moment with Chewbacca, his loyal friend, to not have a last moment with Princess Leia or Luke Skywalker, the audience was completely betrayed of any meaning for that death, was betrayed by not being able to see our beloved characters who just, if you're watching all the movies in order, a few hours ago was alive and well and saving the universe. And my God, if there was a child and we had just finished watching Return of the Jedi, I don't know that I'd want to skip to the next movie to see what happens. Because what happened, how the character of Han Solo was treated in his death in The Force Awakens was offensive to me and told me that this franchise was in the wrong hands. Because you can't take a character like that and have him go out that way. It's not a bad thing, and this used to be, yes, it's a Hollywood trope. Riding off into the sunset was a fine way to go, right? It worked for Shane. It worked for many iconic Hollywood films. We're gonna ride off into the sunset. Maybe we don't need to see the death. We can imagine other adventures with that character, but their story has been told and they can ride off into the sunset. But if you're actually going to kill an iconic character, it needs to be done with some level of respect. And every way that could have been handled in a much better way, which would be to have some final words. They could have even done it in that movie. He could have been mortally wounded by Ben, thinking he could have turned his son back from the dark side to the light. And he was mortally wounded. And you can imagine a scene with Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia over, a dying Han Solo. And what the words that might have been said, we'll never see that now. So I'm just offended by that. And so I think that's, If you look at those two cases of Spock and his sacrifice in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, just go watch that scene. And then you compare it with the scene of Han Solo, meaningless, without even a funeral. And even when Rey returns and, there's the knowledge that Han Solo, is dead, she just goes to hug Rey, not like, Chewbacca, who she's known for decades. I don't understand. So I really question the thinking of some of the people in charge who are overseeing some of these beloved franchises, and how that affected not just children, who these movies are really made for children, or for older dudes like myself who saw the classic films as a kid and would at least like these characters to be treated with some level of respect. George Lucas famously consulted a child psychologist when he toyed with the idea of making Darth Vader the father of the hero of his movie, right? He was, I don't know, I want to see how this is going to affect kids. Was there any vetting done by how this might affect the audience if you're going to handle this death in that way? And in each of the sequel trilogy movies, the deaths of the characters are handled with this, not using what I would consider to be a respectful death, which is there needs to be someone to react to that death that is meaningful in that character's life. And of course, Spock's best friend in the universe was Jim Kirk. So when he made that sacrifice, it was meaningful. And Han Solo's sacrifice seemed like a waste. Something else that occurs to me also related to Star Wars. Yes, a recurring topic in conversations that I will have with you and that I have with my friends often. Maybe it's a form of therapy. But what was interesting was that when George Lucas was mapping out the story for The Empire Strikes Back, he realized that the audience would never believe that you would kill Luke Skywalker. So you have this lightsaber duel at the end of The Empire Strikes Back, and it's Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader. Where's the tension? Because we already know that he's making a trilogy. You're not going to kill off Luke Skywalker. So there's really no drama or tension in that scene. So what Lucas did, he's like, okay, since the audience is not going to believe that I would kill Luke Skywalker, what if the real drama, the real threat, is that Luke might turn to the dark side? And because he doesn't listen to Yoda's advice, he doesn't complete his training, he goes off as not a fully trained Jedi and faces his greatest nemesis, who he then learns at the end after losing that fight, that it's his father. Could he turn to the dark side? And George Lucas believed that the audience might believe that he would turn to the dark side. And therein lies the tension. Whereas many of the lightsaber duels that take place in the sequel trilogy are kind of meaningless. So it's important for these characters, and I would say that if you're a Disney shareholder, you probably care even more. If you want a franchise to continue to exist and be profitable, and you want to sell more Han Solo shirts and whatnot, that the deaths of iconic movie characters be treated with respect. And it's an opportunity not just for the fictional characters that love that character in that world to say goodbye, it's an opportunity for the audience to say goodbye as well.
Reminds me of a film I watched recently, I think, or late 90s, early 2000s, and it's about a Hollywood producer, and it shows a test screening. And Sean Penn is one of the characters in the film, playing him. He is Sean Penn in the movie. And it's the famous thing of, at the end, he gets killed, but does his dog. So they show it to this test audience, and they're horrified. And it's a horrific scene, it's awful. And so that is the big dilemma in the film. Do we keep that scene in? And I think Robert De Niro plays the Hollywood producer. I think it's called like What the Hell Happened or something like that. It's got an all-star cast. But where I'm going with this is test screenings and audience feedback. If you feel this way and other fans do as well, why was nothing done? Why was the respect given to one character dying, not so for the other?
I mean, there's actually interesting documentary that I just saw about Alan Ladd Jr. called Laddie. It's actually made by his daughter. And of course, Alan Ladd Jr. was instrumental in getting Star Wars made. But he famously gave a lot of notes to movies, like The Exorcist and whatnot. Like he would give very small notes. He wasn't like telling filmmakers what to do. He was more like, okay, we're watching this in a screening room and like, okay, but there's this element missing. Sometimes it's, it's important to take that step back. And I do believe that test audiences can actually help improve a film. I know that, for example, they call them focus groups. Quentin Tarantino has a more colorful term for focus groups. He calls them fuckus groups. But I know I said I wouldn't swear. But I think that it's important to to keep those kinds of feelings in mind. There's a lot of feelings wrapped up in an audience's experience with this. That's why I think these death scenes are so critical. The approach to it. I'm just surprised that the legacy characters from the previous trilogy, which if you're doing a marathon are just, were treated so poorly, that there wasn't as much thought given to that, people have invested, we're talking about the movies here, but also we're also talking about there are comic book stories about these characters. There are stories I've made up in my mind about these characters. Yes, when I played with action figures when I was a kid, there are stories we made up in our heads. There are novels. There are radio plays. There are all sorts of stories that these iconic characters have participated in, and we've experienced those. There's a lot invested. So the callousness with which that was done is shocking to me to this day.
Why are there so many bad sequels?
There's so many bad sequels because I feel like the essence of what made the original so interesting is the thing that's not really focused on. Usually what's focused on in a sequel is more, and it's more spectacle, not the thing that made it compelling to begin with. I think the way to answer this question is to look at the sequels that succeeded. Films like The Godfather 2, right? Godfather 2, was an even more complex film than the original Godfather. It plays with time, where you're having two stories being told simultaneously. The story of Vito Corleone, his rise to power, along with the present day Michael Corleone, who's you're seeing his story play out in present day that the story's being told, and it's also different, and it's original in the same way that the first Godfather was original. I could apply that same thing to Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. The Empire Strikes Back ended on a cliffhanger. The original Star Wars ended with this triumphant ending, the good guys win. When did the good guys ever lose in a fairy tale? Generally never. But The Empire Strikes Back did that. It didn't even tell a complete story. And at the time you had to wait 3 years to see what the conclusion of that story would be. So doing something original and different rather than more of the same, which would have been, let's have another Death Star, which of course they did twice more in Star Wars films. Maybe 3 times if you want to count Rogue One. But going over old territory is boring. And I feel like
what you need to do is, in the same way that the original film was a risk in doing something original, if you're going to do a sequel, you also need to take risks and do something different. I would say that this doesn't apply as much, but with Alien and Aliens, Alien directed by Ridley Scott, Aliens, James Cameron. One's more horror set in outer space. The other one is action movie. More aliens, right? But it's a different type of film. And a continuation of that story told with some originality. That's another sequel that holds up. But so many other sequels that I have not named are terrible for the very reason that they just try to give you more of what was in the first one rather than, defy your expectations. And that, I think, has to do with fear on the part of the filmmakers and not really trusting the audience. I think you need to trust the audience that they want to see these beloved characters from the first film in new and different situations, things that are challenging to those characters. And you don't often see that in sequels. It's just more. I think that's lazy. As much as the Fast and the Furious movies are financially successful, I don't know if you could call any of them critically acclaimed. Those films tend to do well, but it's just more craziness. It's more over the top. It's more. In the last one, they go to outer space. How much more over the top can you get? It's ridiculous now. I mean, at this point, just take, a friend of mine once suggested, just take the drivers from Fast and the Furious and put them in the Transformers cars. They're driving the Transformers cars. Why not? Combine franchises. It would at least be original, right? But I think if you're going to do a sequel, you've got to do something different and original, because that's keeping with the characters, and you need to challenge the characters in ways they were not challenged in the first film. And I'm not saying that that's something easy, but when you look at what a successful sequel is compared to one that is completely forgettable, they made The Fly 2. The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, they made a sequel to it. Gina Davis's character dies in the opening scene. There's many sequels I could name off the top of my head. You would not even remember that there was a sequel. The Highlander 2, there was a sequel. I think there's 9 of those. But the only one that really holds up is the first one. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky. I feel like it's important to be original in the same way that the first one, what people liked about that, flip that, defy expectations.
I'll go back several decades, but Staying Alive and Saturday Night Fever, and I know I'm really dating myself here, but both fantastic films. Staying Alive to me, Staying Alive was a little bit better in my sense than Saturday Night Fever, just because I enjoyed John Travolta's journey staying in this crummy hotel. He's this hungry dancer. He meets Finola Hughes, who's got this upper hand and can help him, but there are strings attached. It's just a fantastic cast of characters. And to me, I thought that the storytelling was richer. But again, that's going back several years. It's not a franchise. I understand that. Some of viewers may not know that movie, but I thought that the storytelling was way better. But
yeah.
Do you remember that film?
Yeah, I remember it, and I wish I could forget it.
Oh, you do? Okay, it was that bad?
No. It just, that film, I just remember the phenomenon being the music. I remember it was R-rated, and I could not go see it. So,
okay.
At the time that Saturday Night Fever came out.
Sure. Yes, I think I remember that too, but I think I saw it when I was a little bit older. But the Staying Alive, for me, just I thought that the continuation of his journey as this, here he was, this hotshot back home, but then he goes to the big city and he's just this small fish in this very, very treacherous pond where no one's trustworthy and everybody has their own agenda. And the good girl, Cynthia Gibbs, she actually seems like the best character, and he's like whatever with you because she can't get him anywhere. So I just thought it was just a great play on things. But yeah, I realize it's not a franchise. But, that's a great cameo from Sylvester Stallone in the beginning, by the way. So
I mean, look, here's another reason to me that sequels tend to suck is that the first film generally is made to not be a series. The first film is being made to tell a story. And it's usually being made for a reason that there's meaning behind it. There's purpose on behalf of the filmmaker that wants to tell a story that has themes that are woven into the film that the filmmaker wants to express. So generally, an original film that ends up being a part of a series unintentionally, that original film is being made out of some reason that is artistic, and sequels are made for money. So by that very, because of that dynamic, sequels are made for money. Original films that end up being part of a series are usually made to express something an artist is trying to say. That always mucks up what a sequel will be. Interestingly, yes, we're going to come back to Star Wars. George Lucas had Alan Dean Foster come up with a story for a low-budget, independent sequel to Star Wars, which was to be called Splinter of the Mind's Eye. It ended up being a novel. You can find it used in a bookstore. Yeah, a bookstore, probably a used bookstore. Go into one. They're great. Books are these things, it's like the internet, but on really thin slices of wood. Try it someday. In any case, this book was written to be a low-budget sequel to Star Wars because what George Lucas wanted to do is, if Star Wars bombed, he wanted to make a small indie follow-up to that movie to continue the series. And he wanted it written in a way that could be done inexpensively. It's really interesting to see what Star Wars might have been if Splinter of the Mind's Eye was made as a low-budget indie movie. There's love to see a lot of those, but I truly believe that sequels, because they are made purely because accountants at a studio say this will make money. Because if it makes 40% of the original, it'll be in profits if we scale the budget to this. Which is why the budgets generally for sequels are less money being spent than the original. Because there is a formula used by studios to say, well, the movie made X, the first movie made X. If we scale the budget to this, and it just makes even 40% of the original, will be in profits. That old formula is different these days now with so many other pathways for films to make money, but generally the sequel, the budget is less.
Did you see Wonder Woman 1984?
Yes, I saw Wonder Woman 1984.
Okay. First off, did you used to watch the show back in the day?
I did used to watch the Linda Carter show, and I love that show.
Okay.
It's fun. It's wholesome. There's a weird subtext I didn't notice when I was a kid, but now I see it. If you know something about the history of Wonder Woman and that character, but yes, I saw Wonder Woman, and I did see Wonder Woman 1984.
Is this PG-13? Can you tell me the subtext?
Well, it's all about BDSM and fetish stuff. It was always like Wonder Woman getting tied up or Wonder Woman tying up with the lasso.
Gotcha.
Whoever the adversary was to make them tell the truth.
Okay.
It was, this is not an original thought of mine. This is all very well documented. Go down your own rabbit hole on the internet, but feel free to jump off.
Okay.
At some point.
So aside from the S&M angle to it, which that's its own show. What do you think fell short in 1984? The second.
I think what fell short was logic on behalf of the filmmakers. I mean, the thing that really fell short was a believability. You can wish things and they come true. I think it's kind of maybe an idea that should have been vetted. It sounds kind of dumb to me. I just didn't believe it. Whereas, yeah, I believe a woman who's an Amazonian could be imbued with these powers, but Wonder Woman isn't Wonder Woman because of her powers. She's because of her character and her morality, because of her commitment to, defending those that are powerless, from the powerful. And I feel that essence of her character was kind of captured maybe a little bit in the opening scene, which I thought was kind of cute and clever. And the opening scene of Wonder Woman 84 is kind of harkened back to a Richard Donner Superman, I enjoyed that. It was kind of cute and goofy. I'll take it. It's fine. Once it got into the main plot with Pedro Pascal, it just sort of defied logic. And the way that Chris Pine's character was brought back, I just thought was ridiculous. I don't know if the gender was reversed, it was done the other way, it might have worked. It might even be somewhat offensive, Sort of like if they made a female Back to the Future. Let's say if they rebooted the franchise.
Right.
Let's say we're going to reboot the franchise Back to the Future. Let's just think about how we would do that, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's a female Back to the Future.
Sure.
And Marty, her name is Mandy, right? And she goes back, and there's a sexual tension between her dad, or who will be her dad, a younger version of her dad. I don't think that will work.
Yeah, that's a little creepy.
It's a little creepy. So maybe it's a really good thing. It's a good thing that Back to the Future franchise may be one of the only franchises that will not be rebooted. Because if you did reboot Back to the Future with a female Mandy,
right,
and, well, I guess it could be Doc Brown, not going to work. It just doesn't work.
Sure.
Please, Hollywood, realize that it's not going to work. Because we've seen these franchises get rebooted, and it's disheartening to me when you see the number of movies made. It's always based on pre-existing material. And the reason Hollywood does this is because ideas must be vetted in some form. It was a play. It was a novel. It's a franchise, which is generally the answer. It's a franchise that's existed for 80 years, 50 years, 40 years, whatever it is, right? Like, it's vetted. If you're going to invest that kind of money, you want to make sure you have your best chance of being profitable. So I understand from their thinking, but it really does quell what might be some amazing original ideas. That's why I'm upset that we may never see a type of filmmaker like a George Lucas again, creating a fantasy world from nothing as an original series of movies. I mean, Star Wars was certainly inspired by everything from Marvel Comics, Doctor Doom's character, Darth Vader, from Flash Gordon, the serials, from Dune, the book by Frank Herbert. It was inspired by so many things. It's like a blender of all this cool shit into something that's original. And risk is not something Hollywood likes.
Chris, we asked you previously why 99% of today's movies are garbage. That was a few months ago that we asked you that question. The videos got well over 5,000 comments. A lot of people had opinions on it. Upon reflection, is there anything you'd like to add or clarify that you didn't with that video?
Well, that could be an ongoing podcast. Why 99% of movies are garbage. It's really documenting all the mistakes that filmmakers make. I think one that I've seen as a trend that I think I failed to mention in the previous video was the gender swapping of characters. I think that, I mean, you know, I've seen how people think that that's well, we'll just do a female Terminator, or we'll just do a female, you know, a female version of X. I always think it's better to start with an original character and have and approach a film that way. I find it kind of pandering on Hollywood's part to we're just going to do this franchise, which we already know is proven success, and we're going to gender swap the lead. I think that's lazy. I think it's pandering to a certain audience, and that audience may not even really be there. And I think that fans of those franchises completely see through that. And it's you know, I mean, the latest the Mad Max movie that we did that they did recently, Fury Road. He's really kind of the side character, but what Charlize Theron did, she created this amazing new character. I think that was maybe a right way of doing that. The wrong way might have been the you know, Terminator film Dark Fate, which I'm not sure who loved that movie. I know it didn't do too well at the box office. I mean, Sarah Connor is already an amazing character. I don't know why you need to, you know, flip things and gender swap. I think, again, I think audiences see through that. An example, we talked about this earlier, was, you know, one that thankfully they'll hopefully never do, which is Back to the Future. There has been rumblings of bringing the Back to the Future series and doing a reboot of Back to the Future. There was a rumor years ago, and I pay very little attention to rumors because most of them, we all know, are BS. But there was a strong rumor that Justin Bieber was going to be in a reboot of the Back to the Future series. But that's a franchise I don't think you could ever gender swap the lead, like, and call that lead Mandy McFly, and having some sort of weird relationship with a younger version of her father would be very awkward. I mean, that just doesn't work. And then there are cases where gender swapping is irrelevant. For example, the upcoming Dune movie with Timothée Chalamet. There's a character named Dr. Liet Kynes, which I've read the novel, obviously seen the 1984 David Lynch film. The gender of that character is absolutely irrelevant. Not relevant to the character whatsoever in that case. Maybe in some ways can kind of add to something. When you're doing it just to pander to an audience, audiences see through it. I really feel that when you are pandering, whether it's queer baiting or, you know, gender swapping characters or race swapping, it's lazy. It's lazy. You know, I'd rather see more original characters that are, you know, maybe by female creators, Black creators. Where are their voices? If you're simply taking, you know, creators who have done things and just changing the gender or race, I find is lazy. And I think that audiences, they're not really in favor of it, you know? It seems to not be working. And I think if Hollywood just leaned a little bit into originality, a little bit more into originality, and took some risks with new creators. See, that's the thing that I think people don't understand, is that the original creators of those characters, they get money, right? They get money. And so I don't understand why there's not more of an effort to find people who have created original characters that are all across the spectrum of ethnicity or gender, and make movies with those characters, right? I mean, the original creators of those properties would profit. So I think pandering is probably a huge mistake, and underestimated how savvy audiences are, that they see through it.
So if I come in and say, I want to do a male version of Heather's or Jennifer's Body or Mean Girls, you know, I mean, hey, there's male bullying, there's all sorts of stuff. So it's John's body, okay?
Sure.
So that's not probably going to work. Or it's so blatant that I'm flipping it.
Here's the thing. I've seen that story. So I've seen those stories. Changing the gender is not gonna, is sort of, you know, make me care about the character. Because the point is this, you know, I identify with so many characters that aren't me, right? And I think that you have to create something that comes from the essence of what that character is. Ripley is a character I loved as a kid. Ellen Ripley, played beautifully by Sigourney Weaver in 2.5 good movies. But you know, I think that just the sort of, you know, I think it's just lazy to do that, but it's an opportunity for an audience to identify with someone that isn't them. And I feel like you have to, as an audience member, be capable of seeing the world through someone else's eyes. I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it in another video, but like, you have to, as an audience member, have the ability to identify with someone who's not you. That's how you know even the storytelling is great. If you can take just sort of a regular dude like me, and I can identify with a woman who's maybe not a woman who's white, who's maybe not a woman from the United States, who's maybe a woman that's going, that to me is great storytelling. I would say another film that I thoroughly loved, Amélie, French film Amélie, right? Okay, not a woman, I don't speak French, you know, a lot of her experiences very different from mine, but I identified with her. I was on her journey. And so that to me is, you know, storytelling is great when, you know, vastly different people can identify with someone that is not themselves. I don't need to see me reflected in a film. In fact, I prefer not to. You know, I want to see someone new and interesting and different. And I think that what's lacking in the storytelling is making these stories universal. So the gender and ethnicity is irrelevant. It should be irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, just you had said earlier about the Marty McFly character turned into
Yes.
Andy McFly, and you're right. It wouldn't work especially for the one fact of flipping it with the dad. Now, to have a Biff character that's female that's bullying her, that actually would be interesting, and then her sort of going on this journey and playing in a band.
See, now you're being like a studio executive and you're pitching the female Back to the Future. Please. Please, I will say this to camera, which I know my eye line is you, but I'm going to say to camera, please, if you're a studio executive and you're watching this, do not ruin Back to the Future. Do not ruin Back to the Future by making a female Back to the Future. It would be terrible. Think about it deeply. This is not a good idea. Seek out original ideas from original creators who have original stories to tell. Please. So I don't have to do a third version of this video, please.
Here's a thought. Have movies lost their cool because television has become so good? So if you think back to growing up, TV was more restricted, and everything cool happened in movies, like Kramer versus Kramer. Ooh, there were some scenes that I wasn't supposed to see, but I saw them anyway.
Right.
Now you can see it all on TV.
Yeah, I do think that television has succeeded so well when it comes to, you know, long form storytelling. I do think that there is a bit of abuse in that, where I've seen series that were 6 episodes, 6 hours, that would have made a really good 2-hour movie. But I think that there's an appetite for this serialized long form storytelling, and we've become used to that. We've become used to the binge watching. So going to the theater to see, you know, a story that's going to wrap itself up in hopefully 2 hours, maybe is not as satisfying. And even, you know, when you look at the Star Wars films or the Marvel movies, it really is just every Marvel movie is a continuation of the last Marvel movie in some form, because we know there's going to be Easter eggs. We know there's going to be, you know, cameos from characters. So Marvel movies, in a sense, have become not only its own genre, but, you know, a sort of a form of long form storytelling. With the Disney Plus series, the you know, those kind of filling in the blanks between movies. But I think that television is great. I mean, television is where nudity in movies has migrated. There's hardly nudity in films anymore. I mean, it's you know, you're going to sacrifice something at the box office if you choose to include adult themes in your feature film being released to theaters. If there's nudity in it, you know, that has migrated onto television. You know, it's a golden, as Mr. Skin, who was recently on the Film Threat podcast, told me, it's a golden age of nudity in television, not so much at the movies. You know, there aren't, like, the genre of teen sex comedy kind of doesn't even exist. People forget that the original Porky's film, such as it was, yes, it does feature nudity, but also there's a, you know, underlying message of anti-Semitism woven within that film that, of course, no one remembers, except for me. I remember this. I don't know why. I remember weird facts. But you know, maybe this is also why television, part of the reason that television in a way is more popular than films. I don't know if anyone's ever done this study. I would love to see, because I think box office is an irrelevant metric by which to look at. It's something the industry uses as a piece of marketing. I don't like that box office is so important. It tends to be to Hollywood because it's, again, a piece of marketing. My mother, who doesn't pay attention to the industry whatsoever, she knows what the #1 movie at the box office is, because it's used in the marketing of movies, right? But that's not an important number, because that number is irrelevant, because due to inflation, if adjusted to inflation, and you can look this up, Gone with the Wind is in the top films, not whatever the purported top films are, right? You know, because we're not privy to a lot of the data from these streaming services, we really don't know what is incredibly popular. But they wouldn't be making so many of these series if they weren't at least getting numbers that got the eyeballs they needed to be somewhat profitable. But because we're, as the general public, not privy to those numbers, we're not given, other than the people who have access to that data, we're not able to learn the lessons from that. There are lessons to be learned about the failure of something like Terminator Dark Fate, right? There's a lesson to be learned there. I don't think Hollywood's quite learned the lesson yet. That's kind of how we learn, right? You see what resonates with an audience. And box office is one barometer of that. Adjusted to inflation, I think is the better way to report those numbers.
Do you have more hope for the future of television or film?
I certainly have hope for the future of television. I think that, statistically speaking, if I watch something on television and I vet that choice, the idea that I'll have a good experience with a show based on recommendations, friend recommendations, tends to hit more often than not. With the movies, not so much. With the movies, it's probably 50-50 or less. You know, that'll be a decent experience if I know what I'm getting into. I am a person that does enjoy a good, bad film.
Why?
Good, bad films are look, there's a certain kind of television that is made for stoners, right? I mean, like, I think a show like Archer, that's the animated show Archer, that's like stoner TV. I mean, you know, most of the Adult Swim shows are for stoners, right? There's sort of a good, bad, I mean, like Tim and Eric, their show is kind of based on that, right? So, and there are films I tend to like, but I know that they're bad. Trauma movies, you know, by Lloyd Kaufman, one of the longest, you know, existing independent film studios is Trauma Studios. You know what you're getting into. You also should be aware that James Gunn from the Suicide Squad and the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, he began his career at Trauma Studios. He wrote Tromeo and Juliet. So I kind of like, if I know it's going to be bad, it's not like something that's going to change my life, but I will laugh and I don't have to be fully engaged in it, except for, you know, maybe the scenes where there's lots of gore or violence, which you can always count on in a trauma movie. But that's the place where a lot of people cut their teeth, is in the exploitation genre. Everyone from James Gunn, Francis Ford Coppola, Ron Howard, who famously, you know, worked for Roger Corman. It's a place you can play and it's okay to fail. And it's you know, and to learn the basics. I think it's just as important to watch a bad film and take the lessons from it as it is to watch a good film. So why are 99% of movies garbage? Well, you know, sometimes garbage movies are made on purpose. There's a big business in that. Just ask Lloyd Kaufman or Charlie Band, Full Moon Entertainment. You know, famously done, most famously known for the Puppet Master series. Love the Puppet Master films. They're dumb fun. So I think it's kind of like just knowing what you know, you can't eat steak for dinner at every meal, right? Sometimes some fast food or quick meals are going to work their way in. And that's what I consider a bad movie. I just want to know I'm getting one. Unlike Terminator Dark Fate, where I go into every movie hopeful it's going to be awesome. And it's not.
When an artist wins a Razzie, how much of it do you think was actually planned, or none of it? I mean, does anyone really want to win?
I don't know that anyone ever wants to win a Razzie. I mean, Showgirls won a Razzie. And you know, I mean, that film, actually, we look at it now, there's so much more going on in that film, Showgirls.
Right.
There are bad movies that age differently. Yeah. Maybe they were ahead of its time. They were ahead of their time. Like a film like the original Blade Runner, or a film like Showgirls, that like there was much more going on beneath the surface. I mean, the trans community in particular has embraced the movie Showgirls as just having much deeper meaning. There's a documentary that discusses this that I highly recommend that you check out, called You Don't Know Me, N-O-M-I. Check out that documentary. That's a whole deep dive analysis of Showgirls, a sort of re-examination of that. Additionally, like why there's a whole fandom around Showgirls, which I find fascinating. Great documentary that breaks that apart. And looks at it, but we just don't know like what's gonna age well with time, right? Like what's going to defy what will be a cult classic, which no filmmaker wants to win a Razzie or have a film that's called a cult classic, because both of those things imply that you failed. And I don't think I've ever met a filmmaker that tried to make a bad movie. Although I will say this, John Waters has a great quote about that. John Waters said, you know, if you try to make a bad film, you can't fail.
If you were the head of a movie studio, what 5 movies would you greenlight right now?
Whoa. If I was head of a movie studio and I could greenlight 5 movies, I don't know if this is cheating, but I would greenlight 3 movies, which would be to redo the sequel trilogy to Star Wars. I mean, maybe that could count as one. But I feel it was such a dissatisfying end to, I guess, what was intended to be a 9-film saga, although who knows, when you're watching this, maybe they'll do 12 films. There'll be another Star Wars trilogy, but I would greenlight that because that's a safe bet, and we would do it right this time. The other thing I would do is probably Confederacy of Dunces. I think is a classic book that you know, a lot of people have, you know, there have been false starts to getting that made, that book turned into a movie. Another one would be the Chuck Palahniuk book, Survivor, which is probably one of his greatest books, has such an incredible scene set during the Super Bowl that if it's ever committed to film will be incredible. I don't really know how you could really make Survivor would have to be done almost in the way of Fight Club, you know, just like with a big budget and just like not care what people think. But it's about a guy telling his story into the flight recorder of a plane where he's taken his plane hostage. He's this spiritual guru who has been in trouble with the law, who now has commandeered a plane, you know, and gotten everyone off the plane. So he is literally telling his life story into the flight recorder. And it's what he's saying into the flight recorder, that's the story being told. Brilliant. It's a book that I will read every couple years just to remind myself that this is what can happen in writing. It's amazing. So I would greenlight Chuck Palahniuk's Survivor, which is famously where the phrase Suicide Girls came from. That name is, you know, the website was named after a line in that book.
Is it that those type with sort of a goth?
Yeah, it's sort of like, oh, those Suicide Girls, and the founders of the Suicide Girls website took that line, and that inspired, like, oh, we're going to start a website based on that. So that would be one that I would do. I'd like to see, I don't know that a studio needs to do this. I would like to see a documentary about Marsha Lucas. Marsha Lucas had such a profound impact on filmmaking in the 70s. You know, she was just respected by everyone from Francis Ford Coppola to Martin Scorsese to her husband, George Lucas. There would not be a George Lucas if not for Marsha Lucas. There's never been a deep dive, I believe, documentary about her speaking today about, you know, you can almost see there's like Hollywood before Marsha Lucas and after Marsha Lucas, the impact that she had. There's a rare, and I've never seen it, but I've read articles about a rare rough cut of the first assembly of Star Wars, black and white, you know, taken from, you know, the dailies, they cut it together, and it's just like, and it's an unwatchable film. It's terrible. The original Star Wars. I mean, there's like inappropriate humor, which kind of reared its head again in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But you can see the choices that Marsha cut things out. There are things where just a few frames are cut and it changes the dynamic of a character, as seen in the Cantina bar at Mos Eisley. Before, you know, Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi meet with Han Solo and Chewbacca, Han Solo's sitting with this attractive woman and just sitting with her, and she gets up and walks away. Marsha Lucas cut some frames. She's not there. She's not even in the movie. She saved that film in the editing. Many of the special effects in the original Star Wars, the reason they're so impactful is because they're not on screen for very long. So at the time that came out, I mean, it was so fast paced, and a lot of the effects objectively didn't work, but because they were on screen for so brief a moment, it worked. So I'd love to see a documentary about Marsha Lucas that really, really details her contribution to film, not just Star Wars, but, you know, how she was so widely respected, you know, by all the greatest directors of the 70s. You know, and then after her parting ways with George, you know, she was basically ostracized. I mean, she was, you know, working with her she was just out of Hollywood at that point. So that one is a huge shame. I'm trying to think of others. There's just so many. I would like to see the comic book, The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller, that 4-issue series. You know, Zack Snyder was inspired by that when he made Batman v Superman. The thing that made The Dark Knight Returns so compelling was that it had all this history in it. It would be great to see that comic book turned into a film. Another one, and maybe someone from Marvel is if someone from Marvel watches this or listens to this is a comic book that no one knows about. I bring up every once in a while. It's a comic book called Strike Force Muraturi. And it's about a group of people that have superpowers. It's in a far future of the world where aliens invade and they're slaughtering humans. And the humans are losing. So there's a program that's developed to give people superpowers. There's only one catch. You only live for about a year. So you don't know what kind of superpower you're going to get. You don't know how you're going to help in this battle against these invading aliens, but you only get to live for a year. So you're putting your life on the line, and sometimes you don't even live that long. So it focuses on the second group of heroes that have gone through this process. It's a series that Marvel did back in the 80s. Never forgot that story. Thought it was really impactful, filled with pathos and drama. A whole group of, I mean, it was, you know, it just a whole diverse group of characters. All this, like the world's at stake, but it wouldn't really fit into the Marvel universe at all. You know, because it's just sort of this separate universe. But I'd love to see that. I guess if I'm a Hollywood executive, I'm greenlighting big budget, you know, franchise films. So maybe the Marsha Lucas documentary wouldn't necessarily fit into that all that well. But, you know, God, there's just so many I'd love to see made.
What would you cancel?
Well, I would have canceled probably maybe the last 5 years of franchise reboots. There has almost universally not been one that's succeeded in a way where everyone is like, that was awesome. I mean, you know, just a quick example, like for example, Lord of the Rings trilogy, not The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings. We don't really talk about that series of movies so much. The reason is there's no debate. People who don't like Lord of the Rings, I'm not a fantasy film fan, right? And I wasn't a Lord of the Rings fan necessarily. I remember the Hobbit cartoon by Rankin Bass back in the day, which used an early form of rotoscoping, which is interesting. But I was not a fan of Lord of the Rings per se, and that movie that series of movies made me a fan. You know, it's incredible, and we don't really debate about that because there's not that much debate. They're objectively amazing films. If you're a hardcore Tolkien fan, yes, there are nitpicks, but there's almost no debate about it. But I don't know that we'll ever stop debating the disappointment that was that Star Wars sequel trilogy. I feel like that is a debate that will just continue. I just wonder, will Hollywood learn the lessons? I would want to go back in almost every franchise that was rebooted. Ghostbusters, Terminator, Dark Fate. You know, there's so many. You know, Did we need more Fast and the Furious movies? I don't know. It seems to me that these franchise reboots, I mean, in some cases, there has too much time has elapsed between, they want to do another film and whatnot. It's just because the branding exists, right? There's that recognition, like when they name a movie after a familiar song, right? Like that's sort of a laziness on the part of Hollywood. But yeah, I would, if I could cancel or wipe away, or if I could just do the snap that Thanos did, I would get rid of every franchise reboot post probably 92.
What about A Star is Born? Did you see the first one?
Yeah, A Star is Born. Well, but it's such a different approach because there's, it's the music world has changed. It's about being invested in those characters. That I don't really think fits in that category. I think that Star is Born is just a classic story that's just like, okay, this is familiar. The bottle's familiar. We're gonna put like maybe a slight different flavor. You know how like they have those different flavors of Coke, like vanilla, cherry vanilla, orange Coke, lime Coke. They do make that. So it's familiar, but with like a twist. And yeah, I mean, that Star is Born movie with Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga is pretty damn incredible. Yeah. I really don't have much to say about that one, except good job, Bradley Cooper.
As the head of a movie studio, what would be your mission? And what would it be called, by the way? What would your studio be called?
Well, yes, it would be called Gore Film.
Okay.
That would be my movie studio. Mm-hmm. And I would... I mean, look, you have to tell stories where it's an amazing story without the superficial elements, right? There has to be something to say about, our current climate. We live in such divided times. I don't know why there are so few films about that. Why are we so divided? Why is it that people living in the same country who all want the same things, why are we so divided now? And there are so few films that are dedicated to that. I do see a lot of documentaries, and generally the documentary films of a political nature are generally, they're on the left or they're on the right. And it's really disappointing because as the viewer, I would like to be able to come to my own conclusion rather to be led into one that you determined before you started making the movie. So I'm surprised that when you look at the kind of issues that films from the 70s, were taking on, very challenging issues, I don't know why we're not doing that now. So much of Hollywood now is about dictating some sort of predetermined message. It's not entertaining. I don't mind if some of that is woven in, but I do mind being told how to think. And I think that if I was head of a studio, I'd not be telling my audience how to think. And I would certainly be listening to what the audience wants. And maybe giving them something they didn't expect that I hope they really like. But certainly not pounding them over the head with some sort of agenda. I think we're more alike than we are different, and I don't know why we're not reminded of that. So that would be my mission, and to tell original stories, giving opportunity to small indie filmmakers to tell original stories, taking some risks. Not every science fiction movie needs to have over-the-top spectacle with the fate of the universe at stake. When you look back at some of the old Star Trek episodes, there's so few special effects shots, right? Star Trek really delved into the realm of ideas. And I'd like to see science fiction come back to dealing in the realm of big ideas, and you don't always need big spectacle or big budgets to tell those stories.
So do you think Hollywood can learn lessons from, let's say, art house cinema or foreign films where there's a subtlety? There may still be a message, but it's letting it breathe. It's letting the viewer discover it, whether they're going to agree with it or not. Whereas maybe in Western culture, we're beating them over the head. It's so overt that there's no hiding it, that it's forced. I'm just curious. What?
Yeah, I think we've forgotten, Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. I guess so much of films today seem like they kind of want to break that mold. There's a reason that mold works. It's kind of embedded in human DNA. That kind of around the fire storytelling is universal, and that seems to have been forgotten lately in trying to break that mold. I'm just especially when we see the hero's journey for so many female lead characters, I think a disservice is being done to people who look up to those characters because it's made to look easy. People forget how much failure there has been in some of the iconic movie characters. Everyone from Luke Skywalker to Rocky. People forget, in the original Rocky film, Rocky loses. He loses the fight. Now he gains respect, which is more of what that film is about, but he lost the fight. In the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones loses. He's tied up. His only logic is, I'm going to close my eyes to not get caught up in these evil spirits that are coming out to murder everything, right? He kind of loses. I mean, maybe he wins in the end because he gets the Ark. He doesn't really get the Ark because it's tucked away in a giant warehouse, but he loses. There's something about losing, and this happens more in indie films than it does in Hollywood movies. It happened in The Empire Strikes Back. Luke lost. He lost the fight, lost his hand. I really feel like if it's not tied to character, I don't know how the events of that film really can be meaningful. If it's not tied to some hero character journey that you're on where you can, because we all fail in life. Believe me, we all fail in life. Life is just, it's just learning from your failures, right? And I've made plenty of mistakes in my personal and professional life that I've paid for. And I like to think who I am today is better. That's just failure is how we learn. And I feel like by not imbuing that lesson, we're doing a disservice to young moviegoers who might look up to these heroes. It really is, it's kind of a disappointing time to see how franchises are being, twisted in a way that I don't think serves the audience. But there's something to be said for losing characters that lose more often than they win, and what exactly you win. I think Rocky probably being the most obvious or best example of that, because then they just made Rocky 2. Sylvester Stallone made Rocky 2. And it's pretty much the same movie. I mean, there's some little fun differences in it, but it's the same movie, but he wins in that one. He actually wins the fight. But it's kind of the same movie. They just revisit a lot of the same stuff in the film, but he wins, whatever. But the fact that Rocky lost, but he won, he had a girlfriend, Adrian. He won a girlfriend, even though he's kind of this simpleton, right? This sort of thug. But he won respect. It wasn't about winning that fight. It was about winning respect. And that was tied to him in his humanity and his soul and his character and being. That's why they made so many Rocky movies, because that character is so endearing, And we're on that journey, that constant failure until the end, and then he wins the fight. But in the first one, he lost. And almost no one remembers that. If you ask right now, ask any person you see, like, who won the fight in the first Rocky? And they'll say, Rocky won the fight. No, he didn't.